Great, thanks. So today I'm just going to present a quick overview of the distribution and some observations on the gut content of the oriental weatherloach, which we've started capturing in the SA MurrayDarling Basin region since 2010. So the Natural Resources SA MurrayDarling Basin Wetland and Floodplain Program manage and monitor, among many other functions, a number of wetlands and floodplains across the SA MDB region. And this does include fish surveys, basically to better inform the management of these sites and also to better understand how certain hydrological events, how fish respond to those sorts of hydrological events. So as many of you here are aware, between September 2010 and April 2011, we had the largest flood event in almost 18 years, with flow to SA peaking at over 90,000 megalitres per day in early 2011. And this event followed almost 10 years of extremely low flows to South Australia. And in the following 2 years after that event, we had a number of unregulated and high flow events that also occurred. And I guess these flood events and the subsequent high flow events presented us with a really good opportunity to investigate how fish species use a range of permanent and temporary wetlands and floodplains that are inundated during floods. And it was within this period that the oriental weatherloach was first detected in the region. So what is the oriental weatherloach? It's a fish species that's native to Asia, and it's one of the most abundant fish species found in traditional paddy fields in that region, where it's commercially caught and cultivated as a food resource. The species was first imported to Australia sometime in the 1960s, most likely from Hong Kong, Japan and Singapore, and probably through the aquarium industry. To date, the species has established self-sustaining populations in at least 5 countries, and it's also been recorded in a number of other countries which are outside of its natural range. In Australia, the first wild breeding population of the species was detected in the Yarra River in Victoria in 1984. And resulting from this, the species importation to Australia was banned in 1986. In South Australia, the species is listed as noxious under the Fisheries Management Act, but it's now thought that the species is established in up to 12 river systems in Victoria, 4 in New South Wales and 4 in the ACT, and a single population that was found in Queensland in 1990 is thought to have been eradicated. The species itself is likely to have been introduced to Australian waterways through the dumping of unwanted aquarium fish and its use as live bait by anglers, and its dispersal probably aided through events like flooding. So physically, the oriental weatherloach is a small elongated cylindrical fish that may reach up to 25 mils, however is usually less than 190 mils in length. It has 5 pairs of barbels which help it to detect prey and other food items. It lays between 4,000 and 8,000 eggs when it becomes sexually mature at approximately 100 mils, with spawning occurring in spring and summer in Australia, and it may also occur multiple times in a season. The body of the oriental weatherloach is covered with mucus, which, trust me when I say, it makes it very difficult to handle, but can also help the fish to survive when surviving out of water by slowing moisture loss. So in times of drought, when temporary wetlands and creeks dry up, it'll actually burrow into the mud, and it can survive there until the creek or wetland is re-inundated. The species is able to utilise atmospheric oxygen, which it passes through its hindgut, and it can also respirate through its skin when it's buried. It's very tolerant to a range of environmental variables. So, for example, it's been recorded tolerating temperatures as low as -1.76 degrees. That was a laboratory trial. and up to 42 degrees, so it's well suited to Australia, and it's capable of rapid expansion throughout the Murray-Darling Basin system. And its general food items include aquatic invertebrates, molluscs, nematodes, fish and plant materials, but generally there's very little known about its diet in Australia, so it's quite speculative at present. So fish surveys have occurred across the SAMDB between September 2010 and April 2016. And surveys are undertaken under a range of river flow scenarios, including at the peak of the flood and the high flow and unregulated flow events, during the recession period, at sites that are disconnected from the river but still inundated by floodwaters, as well as under normal river flow conditions and at pumped wetlands. So the locations surveyed include permanent and temporary inundated wetlands and floodplains that have been inundated either through floodwaters or through the management of structures, and we've also surveyed a number of creeks and anna branches. Most of the surveys we undertake in spring and autumn, although there's some additional surveying that occurs, but that's really quite resource dependent. Sampling's conducted using fyke nets, which we set either parallel or perpendicular to the bank and under a Section 115 exemption in accordance with the Fisheries Act and under a JUNA Animal Ethics Committee standards. And at each site we measure surface water quality, and we also conduct a rapid site condition assessment where we look at things like the habitat cover and type, substrate flow and connectivity. So the first specimen I mentioned earlier was captured in early 2011 on the Chowla floodplain. To date, we've captured 328 individuals at 28 locations across the SAMDB region. Its current known distribution in South Australia now extends from 104 river kilometres from the Murray Mouth, which is just downstream of Murray Bridge, to the SA Victorian border. So while initially in 2011 during the flood event, all the individuals we captured were in the Lot 2 region, which is the yellow dots up there. Over the last few years, we've seen the species distribution extend downstream, or at least that's how we've been detecting it. And over the last few years, we've also been capturing it in ever-increasing abundances. So prior to the oriental weatherloach being captured in the SAMDB for the first time, the species had been captured just downstream of Robinvale in 2009, 10 and 11. And then during the flood event in 2010-11, the species was captured just downstream of Mildura, so approximately 70 kilometres from Loch 6 at Chowla. And so it's thought that during the 2010-11 flood event, it didn't just help it disperse downstream in Victoria, but also subsequently into and throughout South Australia. So this is just a length frequency distribution for all the fish that we've captured over and measured over the last couple of years. So oriental weatherloach become sexually mature when they reach between 100 and 110 mils, and so you can see there that the population between 2011 to 2016, which we've captured, is comprised of both juvenile and mature fish. Initially in 2011 and 12, we captured only mature fish, and since around 2013-14, we've definitely started seeing a lot more juveniles being captured. So it suggests to us that the species are now also breeding in the region, which, when we've been doing some gut content, the female fish have all been full of eggs as well. So I mentioned before that at each of the monitoring sites we conduct a rapid site assessment as well as conducting water quality. And we measure a range of water quality parameters, so electrical conductivity or EC, pH, turbidity, dissolved oxygen and temperature. So the weatherloach that we've captured have been captured within their known water quality tolerances. So, for example, it appears that the salinity tolerance of the species doesn't exceed 3,000 EC, and we've only captured fish at sites where the EC has been less than 2,500. So while we have surveyed quite a few sites where the EC does exceed 3,000 EC, we just haven't captured them in those habitats. So the weatherloach that we have captured, the physical habitat varied quite a bit, but so the substrate, for example, ranged from grey clay, soft mud with high organic material, sandy clay, and also one site with gravel. And that's also quite consistent with the available literature, which does suggest that weatherloach have a preference for softer substrates, which they can bury themselves in. We have captured a higher relative abundance of fish from sites where the dominant emergent vegetation type was lignum, often in association with reeds and sedges, and we're not quite sure whether this is something to do with the complexity of that habitat offering some protection from water birds, or simply if that's the most frequent frequently sampled habitat in our regions. So we've still got a little bit of work to do around that. So during fish surveys, we've also captured a whole range of other species. So in terms of native species, carp gudgeons have been the most abundant that we've captured in association with weatherloach, while common carp was the most abundant non-native. We've also captured low numbers of freshwater catfish and silver perch, which are species of conservation significance in South Australia. And we've also caught them in association with frogs and tadpoles, including the nationally threatened southern bell frog. So there is very little information that exists regarding the species diet in South Australia and Australia. To date, we've dissected about 130 fish, and the gut content has varied quite a lot from algae and other vegetative matter to small invertebrates and general detritus. And just to conclude, it now appears that the species has become entrenched in the SA River Murray fish community. The species is being captured in ever-increasing abundances. It's comprised of both juvenile and mature fish, and it does appear that a range expansion has occurred downstream since its initial capture. It's captured in a range of habitats as well as under a range of environmental conditions. Gut content observations appeared to confirm other observations that the species diet is quite broad and varied. And although this isn't a great news story out of the flood, it does highlight how important floods are for moving resources around the MurrayDarling Basin.
All right. Thanks, Irene. Sorry, we're out of time for questions. Next, we've got